Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes Formula One team. Together, they've won 6 drivers and 8 constructors titles in one of the most dominant eras the sport has ever seen. But what if he never joined? What if he kept faith with McLaren for another year before leaving, as he did in 2012? Join me as we step into this hypothetical world and think what might have been if Lewis Hamilton never left Mercedes. Give some context surrounding Lewis Hamilton's move. Back in 2012, McLaren were competing regularly for race wins and even for championships. Now, I made another video about the downfall of McLaren where I talked about these early years, 2007, 2012. Please give that a watch if you haven't. And in that video, I explained that McLaren suffered from a lot of reliability problems, which meant that Lewis lost faith with the team because he wasn't fighting for the championship as he probably should have been on pace. This triggered a departure to Mercedes. But I'm asking myself here, what if he stuck with that team for another year because of the loyalty he had? Because he had been with them since he was 13 years old. So to try and think about what would have happened, I'm going to go through chronologically every year, focusing mostly on the top teams because we could be here forever talking about every team because of the butterfly effect this move would have had. Going over the major things I think would have happened sort of each year. Where better place to start other than 2013? Now, 2013, McLaren slipped back. As they did in real life, McLaren aren't as quick as they were in 2012. They're not even capable of fighting for race wins. Lewis Hamilton doesn't even achieve a single win, breaking his streak far earlier than he did in real life. He beat Jenson Button, no problem, but not much would change elsewhere. Red Bull would win the constructors, Vettel would win the drivers. I think the major change is at Mercedes itself. In terms of competitiveness, they would be close to the front, but not quite at the front. But who would take the seat that Michael Schumacher vacated? My answer, Fernando Alonso. He just lost the championship with Ferrari in the last race in 2012. And what better opportunity for him to move teams and have a fresh start than Mercedes, who open seat and had a project for the future that he believed in. I also think that Kimi Raikkonen would have made his switch to Ferrari at this point to replace Fernando Alonso, who was outgoing. Moving on to 2014, Lewis Hamilton, after his shocking time in 2013 at McLaren, calls an end to his stint there and moves to Ferrari to replace Felipe Massa. That move that year would have been painful. Ferrari were not quick. He beats Kimi comfortably. At the top, Mercedes keep Alonso and Rosberg, and Alonso beats Rosberg to the championship. Over at Red Bull, Vettel does struggle compared to Ricciardo, and perhaps does look at a move away, but Ferrari is not willing to give him that seat because it's filled by Kimi Raikkonen at the minute. He stays at Red Bull for 2015 as a result. McLaren, in the meantime, on the back burner, keep Kevin Magnussen and Jenson Button for 2015, with no other real options emerging at the time. 2015 brings another title, a fourth for Fernando Alonso, beating Nico again. Ferrari, they do take a step forward, which means that Lewis Hamilton is able to fight close to the front and mix it with the Mercs when they're off the pace. In fact, he wins the Singapore Grand Prix when the Mercs have a bizarrely off weekend, being slower than both Red Bull and Ferrari. Over at Red Bull, Vettel beats Ricciardo this year, with some bad luck from Ricciardo, admittedly, but Vettel does find his mojo a little bit again. Meanwhile, over at Toro Rosso, 17-year-old rookie Max Verstappen's causing waves by putting in some stonking performances for just someone who doesn't even have his driver's license yet. He's the one to look out for the future, perhaps. 2016. This was a hard decision to make because in real life, we see Nico Rosberg beat Lewis Hamilton. And the question is, would he be able to beat Fernando Alonso in this same scenario? If you apply a lot of the bad luck that Lewis had in 2016 to Fernando, then I do think that Nico Rosberg would be able to beat Fernando Alonso. I think in this scenario, I'm going to make the assumption that he does beat Fernando. I think Alonso is actually more likely to beat him than Lewis was because there's less childhood connection there, which creates this whole other layer of drama. But I'm going to stick with my guns here and say Nico Rosberg to win the championship as he did in real life. I think Nico would then retire at the end of the season. Ferrari and Red Bull are not anywhere near Mercedes. Ferrari slipped to third best car. Red Bull step up to second best car. And Seb Vettel and Daniel Ricciardo, they're fairly evenly matched throughout this period. And I couldn't tell you which one's going to come out on top. I think it would just depend on the luck in that scenario. 2017, we have an empty seat for Mercedes. Who's going to grab it? Spying an opportunity, they grab Max Verstappen from Toro Rosso. Seeing that he has no opportunity at Red Bull at this current time, he steps into a top seat immediately and Mercedes poach him. Ferrari and Mercedes are much closer, which means, rather excitingly, we'd get a Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso title fight. I think Mercedes would just about have the pace. I think they had it in real life, and I think they'd have it here. I think as a result, we'd see Fernando Alonso win his 5th world title. Now, this is not criticism of Max Verstappen, but at the time, he was only 18. We have to remember this, which means that I don't think he was ready to compete for a world title at that point. He was just not, he wouldn't have had the pace of Fernando or Lewis. And I think he would keep making a lot of silly mistakes at the time, especially as he got used to being in such a top team. So Lewis does miss out on the world title, and that may be due to Mercedes' better pace, but also due to Ferrari liability issues and perhaps the odd mistake from him. Red Bull have their driving lineup the same in 2017 as previous years with Seb Vettel and Daniel Ricciardo, but Seb Vettel's clearly getting frustrated. He hasn't been competing at the front for a long time now, and it's exhausting for him to not be able to push as hard as he wants to in that car. Breaking news, in 2018, Sebastian Vettel joins Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari to replace Kimi Räikkönen. Mercedes, they retain their driving lineup, and Red Bull replaced Seb with Pierre Gasly. I think we saw in real life Pierre Gasly did get promoted in 2019 to Red Bull, but I think in this scenario I can see him getting promoted 1 year earlier because of the fact that they need to fill the seat. I think that's simple as that. Seb and Lewis are quite the fearsome duo at Ferrari, as you might imagine, in the same way Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen are a fearsome duo at Mercedes, which means it is an incredibly tight championship battle. I think Lewis beats Seb, but more importantly, he beats Fernando Alonso to win a 2nd world title, with Ferrari also clinching the constructors as Vettel outperforms Max Verstappen, because again, very young, still prone to mistakes. As we saw in real life in 2018, a lot of mistakes earlier in the season. But he's getting quicker and he's learning more, and he's only a matter of time before he's able to compete at the level. My basis for that is that Ferrari were rapid in 2018. I'd argue they had the quicker car than Mercedes for a lot of that year, and I think the only reason they fell off were because, end of the day, Vettel made a lot of mistakes that I don't think Lewis would make. And I think Ferrari would keep fighting for that title win because of that fact they would be there or thereabouts constantly, rather than falling apart at various points throughout the season, like in Monza when Seb spun, or, several times actually he spun. And with Red Bull, we see Pierre Gasly, Danny Rick, 3rd best car, not much they can do. They pick up the odd win here and there, a few wins between them. I haven't talked about McLaren in a while. Now, in the intervening years, they've been at the back. They had a Honda engine which was holding them back, and they've just had plenty of issues. And, K-Mag's been there, Stoffel Van Dorn's been there, Jenson Button's retired by now. They've given up their Honda dream. They've moved back to Renault engines. Toro Rosso has now picked up the Honda engine in 2018. But they're still languishing lower midfield in 2018. Hopefully their fortunes improve in 2019. So, just in real life, 2019, McLaren drop both their drivers. They've had enough. But with no promise of a Ferrari seat, Charles Leclerc joins McLaren alongside Lando Norris. McLaren see a resurgence of sorts, improving their pace significantly from 2018, going up to the upper midfield, fighting for that 4th place. Much improved, especially with such a strong driver lineup. Over at the very front, this is where things get a little bit interesting for me. I've decided to branch out a bit here. We know in real life Mercedes were quickest, and Ferrari essentially built a car that was able to win Monza, and that's pretty much all. They were, in the second half of the season in Singapore specifically, they improved a lot. But what I'm saying is they don't just build a car that can win Monza with their rocket ship engine that totally wasn't illegal. They build a car that can actually corner pretty well. As a result, I think Lewis Hamilton does win another championship here, his 3rd, in fact. And my reasoning for this is just, I think he would push the team in a direction, especially with Seb Vettel, both really big authority and respected voices, would push a team in a better direction than happened in real life. And I think that if they built a car that does have more downforce, that does, race at every track slightly better, that they would have been able to compete with Mercedes. So Lewis would win his third title ahead of Fernando Alonso, Sebastian Vettel, and Max Verstappen. However, I would also say that Mercedes do get back their constructors' crown because I think Max Verstappen would take a step up and show that he's really got the minerals to fight for a championship when necessary. So Lewis Hamilton, third championship for Mercedes, another constructors for them. We saw in the real life 2019 that Seb lost his mojo a bit at this time. I don't think that'll happen again here. I think he will be there or thereabouts, but again, I just think he'll fall short of Lewis because I think just the Lewis's sort of consistency will win out. Red Bull, again, struggling to breach that top two fight. But they would still retain Pierre Gasly and Danny Rick, who, continue to be strong. They produce good performances, and there are no major problems for them. 2020, return of Merc domination. Ferrari suffer their engine penalty of sorts, which means they lose a lot of horsepower due to their illegal engine in 2019. And they fall back, all the way back to P7 in the constructors as they were in real life. However, this time at Mercedes, Max Verstappen beats Fernando Alonso, finally showing the potential that we all knew he had. Red Bull, clear P2, picking up the odd race win when Mercedes tumble. 70th anniversary GP with softer tyres. Daniel Ricciardo picks up that race win. There's still a high level of tension between the Mercedes drivers as well. There are some incidents between them, perhaps. McLaren also nabbed P3 in the constructors with a clear harmony between Charles and Lando that pushes them forward and creates a great atmosphere within the team. So looking to 2021, Lewis had a shocking season. The car was shocking. He's had enough. He's decided he doesn't have faith that Ferrari will be able to compete for championships in the time that he wants. So where does he go to? He goes to Red Bull. Red Bull see an opportunity to recruit an incredible driver. He replaces Pierre Gasly and partners Danny Rick. Sebastian Vettel, also fed up with Ferrari, moves to Aston Martin, as he did in real life, for a long-term project. So what do Ferrari do? Well, I think they bring in Charles Leclerc, who's always wanted to drive for Ferrari, for his dad, and Carlos Sainz. So the same lineup they have in real life. And Fernando Alonso spots the way the wind is blowing at Mercedes with Max Verstappen winning the championship last year and seeing potentially the team favouring him, decides I'm out, leaves, goes to Alpine for 2021 to give it one more go, which means Mercedes have to promote George Russell 1 year earlier than they did in real life from Williams. Gasly, removed from Red Bull, moves to McLaren to replace the outgoing Charles Leclerc. The championship battle is tight, as in real life. But rather ironically in this scenario, we have Max Verstappen for Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton for Red Bull. Now that's what something special. I'm going to say here that Lewis Hamilton does beat Max Verstappen in this scenario. I think that hopefully there's no last lap drama in Abu Dhabi. But I'm going to say that there is just an edge out for Lewis Hamilton, as I think the Red Bull were the quicker car overall through that season, except for the last few races. I think it was nip and tuck, dependent race to race, but I think overall Red Bull had a slightly better package. I think the rules did hinder Mercedes quite a lot, the rule changes in 2021. I know, perhaps a touch controversial, Lewis Hamilton winning a fourth title now, Max still stuck on one. Mercedes do win the Constructors though, with George Russell outperforming Daniel Ricciardo throughout the whole season, meaning that overall, Mercedes do edge it and take another Constructors' crown. McLaren also beats out Ferrari this year, unlike in real life, because Gasly does not perform at the level of Daniel Ricciardo, slightly higher level than Daniel Ricciardo managed to, which means they maximise their points to nab P3. Now we move on to the final year of these hypothetical predictions, 2022. I don't think there'll be much change at the top at this point. There's no reason for these people to change. Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull look fairly set. I don't think that will change. I think, as in real life, Mercedes are off the pace. Third best car. Max beat George in that little battle, but still not competing for the championship as they were last season. Red Bull, they win the championship. Lewis Hamilton P1, Daniel Rick P2, Constructors, everything, as they did in real life. Wasn't quite dominant for the first half, but the second half they just stretched away. And the Ferraris, they falter. As in real life, Charles Leclerc has hope of competing, but towards the middle and end, just falls apart for him, and it doesn't happen. So, that brings us to today, 2023. We're a few races in, but that covers everything. So where do we stand? What is the situation in this hypothetical world? Well, Lewis Hamilton has 5 world championships. Fernando Alonso also has 5 world championships. And Max Verstappen has 1 world championship. All the other drivers' numbers don't change. Schumacher's records are untouched. So we can see Lewis, not as successful as he was with Mercedes, but still an all-time great. Alonso, done better, made better career choices, and done well for himself, and won 5 world titles, finally showing the talent that he does have. I think, we can see also that career choices do matter quite a lot. But I think a point to make here is that, talent does win out. And I think Lewis Hamilton's still winning 5. And Fernando winning 5 too is a great indication of talent winning out in the end. I hope this has been interesting. I hope you've enjoyed the concept. If you have, let me know. I might do more what if scenarios because I think they're very interesting to look at. Let me know if you're interested in that. And apart from that, thank you so much for watching. It's been a pleasure. And I will see you in the next one. Cheers.